All right, we should be good to go. Let's begin in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for blessing us with this new day, this Palm Sunday, as we enter into Holy Week. Jesus, may our eyes be fixed on you, as yours were fixed on the cross. That's where you were heading in order to die the penalty that we deserve because of our sin. You went the way of death so you could go the way of the grave, so you could walk out the other side and declare victory over sin, death, and the power of the devil. Thank you, Jesus, that in you we also get to claim that same victory. So be with us this Holy Week as we journey with you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so there's no Bible class next week. This is our final Bible class on the Gospel of John. We are going to be digging in. We're technically on chapters like 18 through the end, 18 through 21. But if anybody has any questions as we get started, I'm happy to entertain those questions as well from anything that you've read or we've read in the past. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to pass out a handout. Let me give you these, Bob and Judy. Sorry, the print is a little bit small on here. I couldn't get it any bigger. There you go. That's right. I gave one to Jean for you. So before digging into the text, I thought it would be interesting to just kind of visibly journey with Jesus through Holy Week. So if you can take a look at the side with the map on it, the side with the map. So in numerical order, it shows you on the map where Jesus was on what day of Holy Week. So I'm just going to just walk through this, just basically read what's here. Then we'll dive into John. So day 1 is on the bottom right. So this would be Friday before Holy Week began. Jesus went to Bethany, to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So it was here that Mary anointed Jesus' feet with the costly perfume as an act of humility. So this is Mary's devotion to Jesus and her willingness to serve him. So that's Friday before Holy Week. Saturday was the Sabbath, so that is a day of rest. And it's not mentioned anywhere in the Gospels what Jesus did on that particular day. But then Sunday would be what we call Palm Sunday or Triumphal Entry. So Jesus was in Bethany. The map scale is in the middle of the page. Again, sorry, it's a little small there, but between Bethany and Jerusalem, I think, is about 2 miles. So Jesus traveled those 2 miles on the back of the donkey. All right. So that's where we are today, that route between Bethany and Jerusalem. On Monday, we're on the top left, Jesus would have been in the temple. So he went back and forth, probably stayed outside of the city walls and then went in. That's where he saw the money changers and went and drove them out and overturned their tables. If you remember in John's gospel, John includes that actually at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and not at the end. So you can take that up with John when you get to heaven and want to ask him. So that's Monday. Day 5 or the fifth thing, the day of controversy and parables. So it's a day of teaching. So Tuesday of Holy Week, Jesus goes back to Jerusalem. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the ones who include all of this, and there are traps being set by the priests. But then also on Tuesday afternoon, Jesus goes out on the Mount of Olives. So you can see the Mount of Olives is right below there on the fifth day. So Mount of Olives is somewhere between Jerusalem and Bethany. There's kind of a valley there. If you look right under Jerusalem, there's this Kidron Valley. So it slopes down outside the temple and then goes back up to the Mount of Olives. Not day 6. The sixth thing, the day of teaching or rest, on Wednesday. Again, there's no mention of this in the Gospels. The scriptures do not mention this day, but the counting of the days would include Wednesday. So Mark 14:1 and John 12:1. So if you remember, John 12:1 talks about it's 6 days before Passover. That's what and it kind of marks that stamp of time. So 7, back on the left, they go and head back to Jerusalem, to the upper room to celebrate the Passover. Marilyn, we're kind of just walking through Holy Week here. And then at the end of Thursday, after singing a hymn, they go back to the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is in that Mount of Olives, so it's out there in that region. All right. And then 8 is right up above that, so crucifixion. So you can see where the traditional crucifixion and tomb site are located. Again, if you don't remember, the tomb is right there by the crucifixion site where he was crucified. There was a tomb that nobody had been laid in before. We can look at that here today in John's Gospel, but that's the traditional site. So 9 in the tomb, same location. 10 the resurrection, and then. I put on the back of this page, I've handed this out in previous years. We're not going to go through all of this right now. This can just be for you for further study purpose. But this is all of the resurrection appearances that happen in the 40 days after Jesus rising from the dead. So remember, Jesus appears for 40 days to lots of different people. And so here's the listing of all of the different events, where it happened, to who, where you can read about that, okay? So we're not going through all of that. We did a different Bible class on that a while back, but you can take that and look at it, use it for a devotional resource as we head through this Holy Week. All right, so I just find, at least for me, I'm kind of maps and that sort of stuff are helpful, and the visual aid is helpful just to kind of see what it's like. Any questions on this? Okay, then let's get into the text. We're going to start in John chapter 18 today, and I will just highlight a number of different things for you. So John 18, so Jesus spoke these words. He went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden. He and his disciples entered. So again, on that map, the Kidron Valley, that brook Kidron, just on the southeast side of Jerusalem, they would have gone across that brook. It's in the dry season, there's not much there. It's sort of like a floodplain thing that fills up when it's raining. Jesus went to this familiar place. He had gone here before. Judas knew of this location. So we get the sense that Jesus he's not going in hiding. He's going to a familiar place now. His time has come. And he's already told Judas, remember, the one who dips his bread in this cup with me is the one to betray me. And then Judas went right out after that. John doesn't record those details. The other Gospels tell us about Judas going, getting the 30 pieces of silver, and all of that. But they show up. There's a band of soldiers, some officers from the chief priests. So there are Romans who show up, a band of soldiers, but then officers of the chief priests. So the chief priests, the Jewish people, also had their own kind of police force that were, essentially police for the temple. So that makes sense. The Romans had their soldiers, but then they also had their people. So these are Jews and Romans who are showing up. They come to Jesus, and Jesus says, "Who do you seek?" They say, "Jesus of Nazareth." Verse 5. Look at how Jesus responds to them in verse 5. Jesus said to them, "I am he." Remember John in his gospel, all these I am statements? There's been very clear metaphors. Remember 7 of them where Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. I am the gate." Other places he just simply declares, "I am he." But now look closely. Look at the next verse. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. That's the second time he says, "I am he." They say to, who do you seek? They say, "Jesus of Nazareth. If you seek me, let these men go." I'm sorry, I skipped over. Jesus answered, "I told you, I am he." I am he 3 times. I am he. I am he. I am he. John's being very clear here. Pay attention. John does this repetitive nature 3 times. 3 times. We'll get to Peter in just a minute. How many times, maybe you already know, how many times does Peter deny him? 3 times. At the end, when Jesus rises from the dead, Jesus and Peter have this interchange 3 times. So, all right. I am he, I am he, I am he. They come, they try to take Jesus. Peter has a sword. We don't hear much about these swords that the disciples carry, but he's got one. And he strikes the high servant's ear and cuts it off. His name was Malchus. So John is the one who tells us that Peter did it. Other gospel writers just say somebody did it. So John's the one who throws Peter under the bus. And he's also the one who gives us the name. Okay? We don't have it here in John's gospel. I think it's in Luke that they record that Jesus put the ear back on. Okay? So all the gospel writers, they're all talking about these things, but they're all highlighting different things. I'm gonna keep going until somebody raises their hand and interrupts me. How about that? All right. So we're in verse 12. This band of soldiers and their captain, they take Jesus, they bind him, and first they lead him to Annas. Now there's just a little confusing Jewish history stuff here. All right. So first they take him to Annas, for Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. That was back in chapter 11. You can just make note of that, chapter 11, verse 50, where Caiaphas had prophesied that it would be better for one man to die to save a nation. Okay, but it gets a little confusing as it goes on here about, is Jesus in front of Caiaphas or is he in front of Annas? Because Annas is referred to as high priest and Caiaphas is referred to as the high priest. Okay? Here's the deal. Caiaphas was the one actively serving as high priest. It actually, the Romans at this time had some authority over the chief priests. Okay, so the Romans occupied, but the Romans would, for different political reasons, would depose different high priests and put them in. Now that was contrary to Jewish law. Jewish law would have a high priest serve a lifetime. They would be the high priest for their life. But the Romans would move people in and out. So Caiaphas was serving a term as a high priest at this time, but Annas is still alive. Annas is his father-in-law, but Annas still kind of has the title of high priest, just as, I don't know, sometimes people still refer to Pastor Weber as Pastor Weber, even though he's been retired, or President so-and-so, when they're no longer president, still their title. Okay? So just know that, and I can point that out to you in a little bit where it shows back up. In verse 15 through 18, Peter followed Jesus, so did another disciple. This is how John, the author, refers to himself throughout the gospel. He's always referring to himself as another disciple or the one whom Jesus loved. So this is John talking about himself, okay? So Peter and John go to the courtyard of the high priest. Peter stood outside the door. The other disciple, this is verse 16, the other disciple who was known to the high priest. It's kind of interesting here. This is just a little detail that John includes in here. So John's talking about himself and that he was known by the high priest, by Caiaphas. How was John known by the high priest Caiaphas? Well, a number of people speculate, and not just speculating, but looking at the evidence, that John's dad, Zebedee, was very likely a wealthy man. So Zebedee is shown as being this fisherman with multiple people who work for him and multiple servants as well. So it was only the wealthy people who could have servants, really, at this time. So a lot of people believe that Zebedee was a wealthy man and may have, and these are Jewish guys, and so, there's money talks, I guess. I don't know. And not in a negative way, but it's just very possible that Zebedee and Caiaphas, that he rubbed shoulders with some of these guys in terms of politics and leadership in that realm. We don't know for sure how he's known, but he's known, and that's one idea. So he's brought in, and then he says, well, I want to bring Peter in also. So Peter is brought in, and the servant girl who goes to get him, this is where the interchange starts, right? Hey, aren't you one of this man's disciples? Verse 17, I am not, right? That's number one. Okay. Verse 19, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. This is still Annas. So we're talking about Annas here, not Caiaphas. Caiaphas, who's the actual high priest, he's still before Annas, the father-in-law of the actual high priest. Okay? So I don't know. So you're dealing with some politics here, I think. They're trying to, who's going to be the one who's going to do our bidding here. So again, this is late at night that they're just at the high priest's courtyard, right? So they just show up at his house and they're dealing with all this. Verse 24, 18:24, Annas then sends him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, so that's where things change. So Annas sends him off to Caiaphas, the actual high priest. Here we have Peter again denying himself. He's standing by the fire, warming himself. People say, aren't you one of the disciples? He says, I am not. That's number 2. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. I'm surprised that guy didn't punch him in the face, all right? Did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter's trying to hide his sword. He's like, no. Again, he denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. 3 times, three denials right there, right? Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. So we're talking about the Roman governor now. So again, just remember, the Jews have some authority over their people. They have religious sort of legal authority, but the Romans have actual legal authority. And it's not legal for Jewish people to crucify, and that is what they want. If you go to verse 32, 18:32, or 31, the Jews say to him, to the governor, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. They're talking about death by crucifixion. They can stone people to death, as they've attempted to do already to Jesus. But they're talking about a different kind. They're talking about a crucifixion. In verse 32, this was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. That's in reference back to chapter 12. If you go back to chapter 12, verse 32 and 33. John 12, 32 and 33, Jesus said, when I am lifted up from the earth. So Jesus is talking about being lifted up, like lifted up on a tree. The Bible will prophesy, right, that he'll be lifted up on a tree. I'll draw all people to myself. So he said this to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So there's a reference to Jesus being lifted up on a cross, okay? So that's why John is saying in chapter 18, he's, again, pointing us back, saying Jesus foretold this, that he would be lifted up. Now they're talking and saying, hey, we're not just talking about stoning this guy to death. We want to see him lifted up on a tree. We want to see him crucified, and only you, the Romans, can crucify him. The Roman governor, Pilate, Pontius Pilate, as we talk about in the Creed, his actual residence was in Caesarea. That's over here. Okay, so Jerusalem's down here. So the Roman governor's house is in Caesarea. There's been a lot of archaeological work done in Caesarea, and they've uncovered stone inscriptions there with Pontius Pilate's name and dates and things that he said and did in that location in that time. So the record of Pontius Pilate being the governor of Judea at this time is very well documented, not just in the Bible, but in other sources as well. But during Jewish feasts like Passover, the Roman governor would often come down from Caesarea and had another place there in Judea. It's probably a place that Herod the Great built there in Jerusalem, and so he would have come down because of the potential for civil unrest during these kinds of large gatherings of Jewish people. Okay, Pilate, if you want to know, I don't know if this matters to you, but he was governor of Judea from 26 to 36 A.D. 26 to 36. He is in a particularly tough political position during this season. After AD 31, so he was governor from 26 to 36, all right? But in AD 31, the guy who had vouched for him to the emperor in order to get him this political position, that guy in AD 31 was arrested and killed by the emperor for his own uprising and insurrection, okay? So the guy who vouched for Pilate to get his job, and the emperor took that guy's word, that guy tried to create an upheaval, so he got nixed. So Pontius Pilate doesn't have his backing from his guy, so he's in a tough political spot. So he's even more sensitive to the potential for political unrest in the region. That is the biggest no-no in the Roman Empire. The Romans are pretty cool with you doing your thing. Just don't try to overthrow Rome. Pay your taxes, and we'll, kind of just let you do your thing. So Pilate, that's his job as Roman governor of Judea, make sure there's no political uprising. So when all these people and these crowds are coming and doing all this stuff, he's got some, he's doing a political dance here. All right, let me just stop for a second. Everybody good? Any questions? Keep talking, preacher boy. That's what all right. So they go to Pilate, right? And they're trying to, Pilate does a questioning, right? Chapter 18, verse 35. Pilate says to Jesus, am I a Jew? Your own nation, the chief priests, have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus says, my kingdom's not of this world. Right? If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom's not from this world. Right? So you're a king? You say, I'm a king. Right? This purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness about the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate says to him this famous line, what is truth? Right? It's a very kind of, I think ironic is the right word. He's looking in the face of truth in the flesh, asking, what is truth? We know from the other Gospels that Pilate kind of wrestled over this. Pilate's own wife had a dream about this whole situation and basically went to Pilate and said, don't do it, don't crucify him. And so Pilate he goes back out to the Jews and says, I find no guilt in him. But then to appease the crowd, he says, you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. Now, this is not a Jewish law. There's actually no written record of what this custom is. It must have just been some custom that they were doing at this time, okay? Release some prisoner. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They cry out, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, John tells us that Barabbas was a robber. Mark and Luke tell us that Barabbas killed a guy during a rebellion. So again, more irony here that Pilate's trying to prevent a rebellion. And what does he do? He releases a guy who had already caused a rebellion. Pilate's only going to last a couple more years in his job. Yeah? And Herod, who is here, will also only last a few more before he's eaten by worms as well. Okay. We head into chapter 19. Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Flogging was very, very serious. The Romans had 3 different levels of flogging. They had one that was a lesser type of beating that would happen if you just had a sentence, like a slap on the wrist, literally, kind of. They arrest you, not something major. There is a type of flogging for that. So there were 3 levels. This one that they're talking about, and there are Greek words to indicate the different kind of flogging. Okay, the one that's mentioned here, this flogging is the most severe of all of them. Perhaps some of you have studied this before, but this kind of flogging had like a stick with leather whips or pieces of leather attached to it. And then on the end of those pieces of leather were either like shrapnel of bones or metal attached. And so it was intentionally done to tear the skin. There were a lot of people who never even made it to crucifixion. They died during the flogging. It's that brutal. They twist together a crown of thorns, right, mocking him. They array him in purple robe. Purple at this time, again, is the most expensive color. They have to get it from I forget what kind of animal, some sort of sea creature out in the Mediterranean. They squeeze it, and it's purple. And that's how they get the color purple. All right? So only royalty really had the color purple, and so they mock him, right, putting on this purple robe. Hail, King of the Jews. Verse 7, chapter 19, verse 7. The Jews answer Pilate. Again, Pilate is saying, I find no guilt in him. But the Jews answer, we have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he's made himself the Son of God. If you remember back in John 5:18, chapter 5:18, this is where it all began. Chapter 5:18, this was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was also even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So the Jews are saying, this guy not only heals on the Sabbath, but he's blasphemous, he's claiming equality with God. So they use this phrase here in verse 7, he's made himself the Son of God. Now, Pilate would have understood this terminology in his own language. So the Jews are talking about their Jewish religion, but Caesar, the Roman emperor, was also called a son of God. That's how they referred to him. Okay, he was godlike. He was the ruler of the earth. So they're trying to get Pilate, trying to get Pilate to see what they see or what they want. That this guy he's not just claiming to be the king of the Jews, he's claiming to be ruler of the earth. He wants to take Caesar's place. That's you understand? So when Pilate hears this statement, verse 8, he's even more afraid. He's more afraid of what? He's afraid of the uprising, right? Oh, man, okay, we got a problem here. So he goes back into his headquarters, says to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus doesn't answer. Pilate says to him, "You won't speak? Don't you know I have authority over you? I can release you." Jesus says, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore he," that is Caiaphas, "who delivered me over to you, has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate seeks to release him. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So the different, after, it's a little different in each gospel of all the different, in Luke's gospel, Jesus is there before Pilate, and then he goes before Herod, and then Pilate delivers him to be crucified. So it's a little bit, from Pilate, Herod kind of gets his shot at him, and then remember Herod even, Herod didn't see anything wrong with him either. I think that's in Luke. I'll have to find that, but yeah. So Herod is the king of the Jews. So he's and there are there was when the Romans took over, there was a Herod called Herod the Great. He would have been the one who was there at Jesus' birth, but then sometime during Jesus' life, I've got the dates somewhere, but Herod the Great dies, and then all of these different regions, not exactly this, but they get split up. Different regions of Israel get split up between Herod the Great's 4 different kids. I think one of them gets deposed, one gets assassinated, but Herod the Great is the one that, or not Herod the Great. This Herod, I think it's Herod Antipas at this time, is the one that they're dealing with. Yeah. It gets I have to refresh my mind on this stuff a lot too. It's a lot of moving parts. So again, Herod is the Jewish. So you got the high priest, but you also have the king of the Jews, who's Herod. But the Herod at this time is really he's in cahoots with Rome. I mean, it's a political thing. It's not a religious thing, even though they'll do religious stuff too. Yeah, John? The civilian leader. Yeah, I mean, they have religious authority. So kind of over the Jewish laws and that sort of stuff. The Jews do. Okay. So Jesus is taken up to be crucified. 19 verse 17. They take him out bearing his cross. Maybe you've heard this before. He would have just carried the horizontal beam of the cross, not the whole thing. They kept the vertical one mounted out there, and so he would have carried that. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This is such a fascinating thing, right? And many of the Jews read this. It was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. All those languages spoken. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. The chief priests, and they say, no, don't write the King of the Jews. You forgot it. You forgot a word. No. This man said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I've written, I've written. Oh, man. There's so much Old Testament prophecy being fulfilled during the crucifixion of Jesus. I could just go through a bunch of different things with you. From the dividing of his garments, casting lots, to the fact of Jesus saying, I thirst. I want to point out a couple of things to you right now. Who's there at the cross? Verse 25. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. How many people is that? So you got 3, somebody said 4. How many is it? Is it 3 or 4? Huh? Andy, what did you say? Why everybody's named Mary? Because it's a good name. I don't have a better answer for you. I could come up with one. So is it 4 or is it? Yeah, so there's debate here. Well, just even grammatically, what does it say? By the cross were his mother and his mother's sister, comma, Mary the wife of Clopas. So is Mary the wife of Clopas? Is Mary the wife of Clopas Jesus' mom's sister, or is that a third person being mentioned? And Mary Magdalene. So there is a debate among scholars of whether we're dealing with 3 people or 4 people here. There's not. In the Greek, it's not super clear, okay? So I'm just telling you, there are different debates, and depending on which way that you take this thing leads to some different results. I'll tell you one that I'm partial to. That doesn't make it right. But I read about it in the Lutheran Study Bible. Which would be that there's, and this is not definitive, but that you've got 4 people: Mary, the mother of Jesus, and then his mother's sister, 2, 3, Mary the wife of Clopas, 4, Mary Magdalene. If that's the case, when you compare the other Gospels, Matthew and Mark, they talk about the fact that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is there, and then another person, and then Mary Magdalene. This other person in one of the Gospels is said to be the mother of James and John, the wife of Zebedee. And I can't remember. One of those is Mark and one's Matthew. And then Matthew's Gospel says that it's Mary Magdalene, and a woman named Salome. Okay? So if you go back to John, you've got Mary, Jesus' mom, and his mother's sister. It's possible that this sister of Mary is the mother of James and John, which would make John a cousin of Jesus. Which is kind of interesting if we go back to this idea that John was known by the high priest. Also at the cross here, Jesus will say to John, "Behold thy mother," and take care of her. And so if they're already in the family. Now, you can go another way too, and if it's just three people, then you got Mary the wife of Clopas, and that would be Mary's sister. We don't know anything about who Clopas is other than this passage, okay? And then Mary Magdalene. So, why do I tell you that? Not to confuse you, but it lets you in on some other. I don't like speculating. I like taking what we have with certainty and proclaiming the certain stuff. But the areas of gray make you go, well, if it is possible. And there are very many reputable scholars who will say it's possible. Nobody can say really definitively which it is. Yeah. John is also there. Yep. He's writing it. 4 women and John, that is one option, or 3 women and John is the other option. So, yeah. Oh. And that's one of the rationales that Mary, the wife of Clopas, is not the sister, but the sister is. Exactly. Because then you'd have 2 sisters. Talk about enough Marys, more than one in a family. What are we doing? Okay, spoiler alert. Jesus is crucified. On the 3rd day, he rises from the dead. Alleluia. Praise be to Jesus. I want to just close out with these words that John closed out. We're going to look at these on Easter morning, but the very last word of John. There are also many other things that Jesus did, were every one of them to be written. I suppose the world itself cannot contain the books that would be written. Amazing. One other verse before we go. John 20, verse 30 and 31. This is key. John 20, 30, and 31. John says, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Okay? John could have written many things. He chose to write these because he believes that these words demonstrate where true life comes from and that you can have it by simply believing in Jesus. Okay? Awesome. Thank you for your time in John. We're not done yet. We'll be preaching on it throughout this whole week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time in your word. Thank you for your apostle John, the one that you loved, that he had the wherewithal to write down these words so that we can hear you speak, Jesus, and receive life in your name now and forever. Thank you for going the way of the cross. May our eyes be on you this week, walking step in step with you to the cross and out the other side of the tomb.